as we continue on in our study in Minor Prophets. We'll be in Habakkuk chapter 2. And off we go. Habakkuk chapter 2. Last week in chapter 1, we saw that the book of Habakkuk is divided into 3 different sections, 3 chapters, and each chapter pretty much identifies with each section. We saw the first section in chapter 1, verse 1, where it said the burden, which the prophet Habakkuk saw. We talked about that word burden being masa again, and it means the heavy judgment of God on some people. Here in the book of Habakkuk, it's on Judah, and specifically on the Chaldeans or the Babylonians. Then we saw in chapter 2, verse 2, the second portion of the book of Habakkuk. Rather than a burden, it says in verse 2, then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision. So it's not the burden, it's the vision. And then in chapter 3, verse 1, it wasn't a burden, wasn't a vision, but we'll see next week it's a prayer of Habakkuk. So these 3 breaks, the burden, the vision, and the prayer, break up the book of Habakkuk. Last week, as we looked at the burden, we saw that it was a conversation between God and Habakkuk. Habakkuk started it off, remember, in verses 2, 3, and 4. And bottom line is, he says, God, our nation is messed up. We have violence, we have iniquity, we have strife, we have contention. Things are messed up. The law is powerless. Justice is perverted. Why don't you do something, God? That's Habakkuk's heart as we started the book. Then we saw in verses 5 to 10, God responding. He says, hang on to your seat, Habakkuk. You're going to be blown away. I'm going to deal with this wickedness in the midst of my people. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to raise up and bring in a country more wicked than even my wicked people. And I'm going to use them to discipline my nation. Then he goes on in verse 11, he says, however, this nation that I'm going to use, just like the Assyrians did, we saw over in Isaiah chapter 10, 5 to 19, even though God is using this wicked people to discipline his own people, they start to think it's them, not God. They start to take credit for their power and their ability to conquer nations. They start to attribute this power to their own God and to their own technology, their own military, their own economy, their own wisdom, their gods and all. Habakkuk, on hearing that, we saw last week in verses 12 to 17, says, oh God, you are the eternal God, the Lord, the holy God. We're not going to die. I get it. You've appointed us judgment and correction. It's going to be rough, but you're our unchangeable refuge. Remember that rock. And yes, some of the righteous Jews, some of God's obedient kids, will be caught up in the judgment of God on the ungodly Jews around them. There will be righteous people caught up in the judgment of God on the unrighteous people of that nation. So we saw that in verses 14 to 17. And then we saw that whole fishing metaphor with the hooks and the nets and the drag nets and the many different ways that the Babylonians are going to come in and conquer people, specifically Judah, in this prophecy of Habakkuk. Let's just go back to chapter 2 now. We went through verse 1 last week. But let's go back and look at verse 1 of chapter 2 again. We saw that at the end of our lesson last week, we saw Habakkuk in chapter 2, verse 1, he said, I will stand my watch. I will set myself on the rampart or on the tower on the wall there, and I will watch to see what God will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. And we saw him waiting on God, remember. So we look at that and we see lessons here on waiting on God. In the first part of verse 1 of chapter 2 there, we see determination. He says, I will stand my watch. He's waiting on God. He's got to hear from God. He's not getting, God, how's this all going to work? What is going on? And the first thing he does is he has a determination. He doesn't say, maybe tomorrow I'll see if I can get some time with God. He doesn't say, maybe I should spend some time with God. No, he says, I will. I will stand my watch. There is a determination. I'd like us to turn to the book of Jeremiah. Just for a brief, quick turn, I apologize for jumping out of the text. I don't like to do that. We'll do it a couple times tonight, unfortunately. But this is so important. I think we need to go to Jeremiah 29 and just see this here in Jeremiah chapter 29. Those of us here that are waiting on God, God, why did this happen to me? God, what am I going to do? How am I going to make it through this, We've all been there where God's ways do not match up with what we thought God's plan was for our life. We say, I've got to do something. I got to hear from God. The first thing is determination. I will wait. I will stand my watch. In Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10, Jeremiah writes, "For thus says the Lord, after 70 years are completed at Babylon, I will visit you, perform my good word toward you, and cause you to return to this place." Notice verse 11. "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord." It says, "My thoughts towards you are of peace, not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and go and pray to me, and I will listen to you. And you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart." The first thing, determination. I need to hear from God. I've got to understand. Determination. I will stand my watch. The second sentence in verse 1 there of chapter 2, "and set myself on the rampart." That's the tower on the wall. So Habakkuk says, I'm going to not only do it, but I am going to get alone and do it. I'm going to go up into the tower on the wall by myself and hear from God. I'm going to seek him. I'm going to isolate. So we have determination, and now we see isolation. When we're going to have quiet time, it's so important that we have quiet time. When we want to hear from God, get alone. One of the things that I found that really helps, I just don't have it. Anybody have a phone handy? What really helps is if you take your phone and just throw it on, and shut it off. And shut the phone off. It's amazing what that does. And what I do is I turn my phone upside down, because if I turn it this way, it lights up. I go, I got a message. I wonder who it is. Turn it upside down, shut it off, turn it upside down. You will get that message eventually. A trick I found that most of you know is if you let your voicemail fill up and not empty it, you don't have to return calls unless you want to. You don't get that. Call me, it's really important, because it's not there. So I look and see who called, and I'll call you back in time. If it's really important, you know to text me. If you don't know to text me, it's not that important. But turn your phone off. Turn it upside down. At least put it on silent and turn it upside down. It's like being off. But then don't check it. Just let it go. Turn the radio off. I know, we do better with music. Just turn it off for a while. Just get alone quietly. Watch what happens. Just get alone with the Lord. No music. No phone. No TV. Just you, isolation. Quiet time. In a quiet place. With a quiet heart. And wait on the Lord. So he says, I'm going to do it. I have determination to do this. I'm going to wait on God. I am going to isolate. Notice the third sentence. And I'm going to watch to see what he will say to me. And what I'll answer when I'm corrected. Notice he has an expectation. He has faith that God will speak. So he understands that God's going to speak, because Jeremiah says, if I seek him with all my heart, he's going to speak to me. Take a look at the book of Hebrews. In Hebrews chapter 11, thank you. We got a new little thing we're trying to work out the bugs here. Hebrews chapter 11. That did it right there. I did it. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. Take a look at what Hebrews 11, verse 6 says about expectation. When we get alone, we determine to get alone, we quiet our heart before the Lord, expecting to hear from God. Notice in verse 6, but without faith it is impossible to please God. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So we say, I'm going to get alone with the Lord. I'm going to quiet my heart before the Lord, and I have faith to believe that God will speak to me, and I'm going to wait until he does. And that's exactly what Habakkuk is saying here. So lessons on waiting on God: determination, isolation, expectation. And guys, it's an amazing thing when we follow that simple principle. Getting alone with the Lord, with his word, quietly, where we pray, we isolate, and we expect him to speak to us through his word. Amazing things will take place in our life, guaranteed. Now we go on to this second section of Habakkuk with the vision. It says, then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets. That's the old clay tablets they used back then. Don't think of a tablet you pick up at Staples or Walmart or something. It's the clay tablets. And make it plain on tablets that he may run who reads it. He says, so write this vision down very simply, so when people read it, they will be able to act on it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. This judgment is coming. Write it down so people can see it and prepare. But at the end it'll speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it'll surely come. It will not tarry. Then he says in verse 4, behold the proud, speaking of Nebuchadnezzar. Behold this king of Babylon. As the guys are going to be taking us through the book of Daniel, one of you, which one is it that has Nebuchadnezzar going out to lunch? The pride of Nebuchadnezzar. You know who? That's okay. Tito's got that. So Tito's going to be sharing with us about Nebuchadnezzar's pride and all. Well, here in Habakkuk, he prophesies about this. He says, behold, wow, look at the proud. His soul is not upright in him. He's a proud man, and we know Proverbs tells us that a haughty spirit, pride, goes before the downfall of a person. His soul is not upright in him. But, he says, this man is coming in with all this power, all this pride. But my people, the just, the righteous ones, literally, they shall live by his faith. We don't know what God is going to do. Habakkuk says, I'm going to get alone, settle my heart, expect to hear from God. The nation of Israel, just live by your faith. Know that God's in control. And that's what chapter 2 is all about, is that we don't always understand God's ways, but we do understand that God has got it. God's in control. And that's Habakkuk chapter 2. He says, but the just shall live by his faith. This Habakkuk 2 verse 4, the second part of the verse there, is quoted 3 times in the New Testament. The just shall live by his faith, or the just shall live by faith. And I want you to take a quick look at these 3 before we go on, just so you're aware of them, because it's kind of an interesting thing I came across years ago when I was studying, I think Habakkuk or somewhere. And I remember, I couldn't find it now, but I remember it. So let's just take a look at it in Romans chapter 1. In Romans chapter 1, verse 17, in the order of the canonization of the letters, not the order of when they were written, but the canonization, Romans chapter 1, the first book in the canon of the New Testament letters. In Romans chapter 1, Paul writes in verse 16, he says, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. For it's the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, also for the Greek. For in this gospel of Christ, in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. Righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel of Jesus, from faith to faith. As it is written, the just, and that word just in the Greek is the same word as righteous. He says, the just or the righteous shall live by faith. Remember in 17 it says, the righteousness of God is being revealed. And here it says, the righteous or the just shall live by faith. In Romans 1:17, the word that is emphasized there in 17, in the quote from Habakkuk, is the righteous or the just. So the just is emphasized in that quote. Then when we go to Galatians, the second time it's used the way the canon puts these letters together In Galatians chapter 3, verse 11, or verse 10, it says, "For as many as of the works of the law are under the curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them." Verse 11, "But that no one is justified by the law in the sight of God is evident. For the just shall live by faith. Yet the law is not of faith, but the man who does them shall live by them." There, in that quote of Habakkuk, faith is the emphasized principle. So in Romans, it was the just emphasized. In Galatians, it's by faith is emphasized. Any idea in Hebrews 10:38, the third time it's quoted? Do you think maybe there'll be a third emphasis here? So we take a look at Hebrews 10, verse 38. And in 10:38 of Hebrews, we'll go to verse 37. It says, "And for yet a little while he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Now the just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him." Those of you that were here for the Hebrew study, you remember we talked about that in verse 38, and we said there in that quote, "Now the just shall live by faith." Live is the word that is emphasized in that quote. How interesting, it's quoted 3 times, and the 3 components of this Habakkuk 2:4 passage, different parts are emphasized in each time it is quoted. So the just shall live by his faith. The context in Habakkuk is the prideful Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar and his hordes of armies are coming in to destroy, to discipline our people. But the righteous folks will live by his faith in God. Trusting God, even though it appears to the Jew our country is going down the tubes. Our country is spinning out of control. Habakkuk says, "But the just shall live by faith." Now as we get into verse 5, something interesting takes place here. He says, "Indeed, because he transgresses," speaking of the Babylonian king and his leadership and his armies, "Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, because he's a proud man, because he does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell," literally as Hades. We remember in Hades, not hell now. Hades is that holding tank of the dead, remember. Hell is that Gehenna, that place of eternal torment. But Hades is where an unbelieving soul goes until the great white throne judgment, remember. And then the Lord will send that unsaved soul into Gehenna or hell, a place not created for people, but created for Satan and those who follow him. But if we die not believing in Christ, if we die rejecting Christ, then we choose to follow Satan by default, basically. And we end up in this place not created for humans, but that's where we end up. Eternal separation from God. But Hades is that holding tank. And Hades is ever expanding. Every time an unbeliever dies, Hades adds to its number. It's continually always expanding. And that's what he uses here. Because he enlarges his desire. Nebuchadnezzar, he wants to conquer the known world. And because he enlarges his desire as Hades, and he is like death and cannot be satisfied, he cannot be satisfied. Nothing is satisfying this guy. He transgresses by wine. He's proud. He's carousing the nations. His desires ever expanding. He cannot satisfy his cravings for more, whether it's prominence, position, power, possession, people. He wants more, 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 more. You've heard us say over and over and over again, one of the richest men in the world was asked, how much is enough money? Billions and billions and billions and billions of real dollars. How much is enough? And he looked with this covetousness in his eyes. And he said, just a little bit more. Never enough. We've all been there. We know what that's like. If I can just get that car, my life is complete. I just need that car. And we get the car. And for the first month, 2 months, it's the bomb. And then the payment comes in. It's like, well, it's not necessarily the bomb. It's kind of like, what a bummer. But we still drive, we take care of it, and then you come out from the mall, and there's that dent in the side of the car. You got to be kidding me. So you talk to Tom, he hooks you up with, up there, he hooks you up with a Zuni. Zamora, Raphael Zamora, as he hooks you up at the body shop, gets that done. Okay, this is good. And then all of a sudden, a year later, it's just a car. And 2 years later, you even question if it's a car. And what we thought was it, wasn't it. It's true of a house. It's true of a car. It's true of the position at work. It's true of the relationship. If I can just have that person, my life is complete. You've heard me say it. I'll say it again. I got it from somebody else, but it's true. The girl in high school that I thought, that's it. If I have her, life is good. Didn't happen. Went back to the class reunion years later. I had prayed for her. And God said no. I couldn't believe it. I saw her years and years later. I just thank God. Thank you, Lord, because whew. And she looked at me and did the same thing. Oh, thank you, Lord. It's just what it is. It's just what it is. It's just what it is. But if we think, if I can just have that person, if I have that position, that possession, life is it, that's it. We know that doesn't work that way. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And that's what he's saying here. He says it can't be satisfied. And his desire keeps enlarged. He wants all this, is not happening. He gathers to himself all nations. Man, Nebuchadnezzar is conquering like you cannot believe. And he heaps up for himself all peoples. He is conquering. It's not enough. Will not all these people he's conquering take up a proverb against him and a taunting riddle against him and say? And I think of this, it's like a taunting song or more better, like a taunting rap. I forget who the rapper was. I'm not part of the rap scene. You go, really? We didn't know. Well, now you know. But Nicki Minaj kind of took over as the female rapper, is my understanding. And there was another rapper who went to jail or something, and they kind of did rap back and forth. And there was this thing going on, and they had these taunting raps back and forth, and now she's out, and they're I don't know. That's the best I could find Googling. But at any rate, they have this taunting rap going back and forth. That's what this is. Now we get a taunting rap. It's a taunting rap in which we see God writing the lyric. We don't have the beat, but we got the lyric. Check it out. Will not all these take a proverb against him and a taunting riddle against him and say? And each stanza starts off with a woe to him. And it's got 3 verses. Woe to him, woe to him, woe to him, woe to him, woe to him. So what I did to try and make it kind of work is I tried to come up with I words that start with I, because that was the first one I came up with, so I got them all to say I. Some of them are stretches, but you'll get it. The point being is we're going to see this taunting riddle against Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. It starts off here in the middle of verse 6. Woe to him who increases what is not his. How long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken you who oppress you? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become their booty. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. Because of men's blood, and that word blood there is in the plural, speaking of mass quantities of blood. We're going to see that throughout chapter 2 here. And the violence of the land and the city and all who dwell in it. He says, intimidation, the first I word. He says, Nebuchadnezzar, you intimidate the people that you take. I have given you this power to be used as an instrument to discipline my people, and instead you intimidate the people on the way to discipline Judah. You plunder others, one day they're going to plunder you. Those of you that have been studying the demise of Babylon, you remember they got wiped out. Babylon and the Medes wiped out Nineveh. And every other, they wiped out Jerusalem. They took everything from Jerusalem. He says, but one day, the first verse of this taunting rhyme says, you plunder others, they're going to plunder you. Men's blood, plural. There's so much violence and murder in which you are doing. You are intimidating people. The second verse starts off in verse 9 with another woe to him. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house. Speaking of the Babylonians again. That he may set his nest on high. In other words, that he might build up his own defense. That's exactly what they did with Babylon. They built Babylon. Remember, they put this huge wall. Nineveh had huge walls. The Babylonian walls were even bigger. Huge walls. And they took all the things that they captured from these other nations, brought them back to Babylon, and tried to build their defense so they would be safe. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, speaking of the defense, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster, his intemperance, his extreme lavishness. That's the I word. You can do that, they still have these things called thesauruses, where you can get a word. So I was looking for an I word for lavishness, intemperance. It works. I came across this quote. It's interesting. It just means to have, you want the best of the best of the best. Overkill. You have a palace, you want 2 palaces, 3 palaces. You want 1 palace in every country. You just lavish, lavish, lavish. Intemperance, extreme lavishness. That's what they're having here. The quote I came across was, people with intemperate taste, lavish taste. People with intemperate taste will soon have little to taste. So if you just get the best of the best of the best of the best of the best, you'll go belly up. If you're ever on belly up, you realize it was the lavishness that got us there. So here we see the second one, their intemperance. They intimidated the people, and they went lavish, lavish, lavish in Babylon. In fact, remember, that's what Nebuchadnezzar says. Isn't this great Babylon that I have built? The lavishness of Babylon. The hanging gardens of Babylon, if they were in Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Some believe they were in Nineveh, but wherever they are. It goes on in verse 10, you give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples, and sin against your soul. For the stone that you've been building will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. This extreme lavishness. Your material world will fall apart. He goes on in verse 12 to 14, after intimidation and intemperance. In verse 12, in verse 12, woe to him, another woe, who builds a town with bloodshed. Again, it's in the plural. They would use slave labor to build all of this, and if you didn't meet the quota, they just killed the slave and brought the next one in. So it was built with bloodshed. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city, here's the I word, by iniquity. We have intimidation. Woe to him who intimidates. Woe to him who is lavish in temperance. Woe to him who builds a city by iniquity. Behold, it is not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor. Is it not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor to feed the fire? And nations weary themselves in vain. They get, but things have no lasting value. It's built on iniquity. And as they spend all this time trying to achieve all these riches and treasures, it's just feeding into the fire of God's judgment. There's nothing lasting in what they're doing. Nations weary themselves in vain. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. So iniquity, they build a city by violence, and iniquity, it's nothing. But now we take a look at the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, when the earth will be filled with that knowledge of the glory of the Lord as waters cover the sea. What does that refer to? Take a look at Isaiah chapter 11, because Isaiah, this is a quote from Isaiah, it appears. In Isaiah chapter 11, he talks about that very thing. In Isaiah chapter 11, he starts to talk about that perfect servant of God, remember. But then in verse 10, after talking about this peace that'll come when this servant of God will be reigning, speaking of the Messiah, the messianic reign. It talks about the wolf lying with the lamb, the leopard lying down with the goat, the calf and the young lion down together and all. And then it says in verse 10, and in that day there shall be a root of Jesse. Remember in chapter 11, verse 1 of Isaiah, he talks about the Messiah coming out of Jesse's family, a descendant of David. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse who shall stand as a banner to the people. For the Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left, from Assyria and Egypt and Pathros and Cush, Elam and Shinar and Hamath and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations, it's this messianic reign, and will assemble the outcasts of Israel, gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Here we start to see what is going on. It's this messianic reign as seen as a fact. It's going to happen. There it is. In Habakkuk, he shows it not as a fact, but as an act. He says, for the earth will be filled. It is coming with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Isaiah says, this is the prophecy. Habakkuk says, God's going to do it. It goes from a fact to an act. So we see the comparison here. A city that is built on iniquity. The iniquity, woe to him who tries to rise up with iniquity. Trying to invest in things that don't last rather than into things of God. But the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, that's what's going to be known worldwide. Then we go on into verse 15. Woe to him, the fourth stanza, who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle. And that word in the Hebrew is a strong picture of force. Pressing him to your bottle. It's like grabbing the back of a head and drink it. He says, woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to the bottle, even to make. And that word make in the Hebrew again speaks of force, making him drunk. So you are going to drink of this. Specifically, yes, booze, but also the judgment that is coming upon you. It's a picture both ways. But it's forceful, and that's the big issue here. The indignant forced drink, the violence, the drunkenness, even the lust. Take a look. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to the bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. Remember in verse 14, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. But in this kingdom, because of the intimidation, the lavishness, the intemperance, the iniquity, the indignity here, it's not going to be glory, it's going to be shame. You are bringing people that you conquered to shame. You are getting them drunk. You are violent with them. You are sexually abusing them. It's going to bring shame on you. Notice what it says. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink. And now they will drink of the cup of the Lord's judgment. Notice what it says. You also drink, and you will be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you. And utter shame, it's the strongest word for shame. It's only used once in the Old Testament, right here. And utter shame. It is disgrace. It's the strongest word for shame. You are shaming people by what you're doing, going through. God's going to judge you, and you're going to have the worst shame possible. You're going to be disgraced. Utter shame will be on your glory. He goes on, for the violence done to Lebanon will cover you. And the plunder of beasts which made them afraid, the natural consequences of not worshiping the true God, because of men's blood, plural again, all the bloodshed. Babylon's captivity, we need to understand, we kind of look at it like a chess match sometimes when we look at the history. Assyria did this, and then Babylon came and did this. Realize this was ruthless stuff going on. Ruthless stuff. Horrible things. As the Babylonians would come in, they would kill thousands and thousands of people. They would rape and plunder everywhere they would go. Age made no difference. Oftentimes, sex made no difference. It was ridiculous what was going on. It was horrible, horrible, horrible atrocities going on. And he says, because of that, you're going to be utterly shamed. Because of the violence, it's going to cover you. And the plunder of beasts, which made them afraid because of men's blood, plural. And the violence of the land and the city, and of all who dwell in it. The indignity, woe to him, intimidation. Woe to him, intemperance. Woe to him, iniquity. Woe to him, indignation. Horrible, horrible, horrible thing. You will drink from the cup of God's judgment, he says. Then verse 18 to 20. A little bit different. The woe to him starts in the middle of this passage. He starts off in verse 18, and he says, what profit is the image that its maker should carve it? That molded image, a teacher of lies. That the maker of its mold should trust in it to make mute idols, idols that can't speak. The Bible talks about that throughout the Old Testament because Israel was really struggling, remember, with idolatry. Where they would take a log and they'd make something out of it, and then that was their God. Living in Santa Fe for a number of years, oh man, craziness up there. Craziness. They wouldn't usually call him God. Sometimes they did. But usually it was just good luck things or special little things. They even built their houses with little nichos in them so you could put them in there and light a candle to them every once in a while. It's like, this is whacked, man. This is really whacked. You just made that and now you're going to worship that. I'm so glad that I don't worship a God that I created. I worship the God that created me. I mean, hello. Hello. It deals with idolatry. As we know, the nation of Israel, Judah specifically now, was struggling with idolatry. And because of their idolatry, that's the number one reason it appears that God brings them and disciplines them as hard as he does. And he brings them into Babylon. Basically, he says, you like idolatry? I'm going to put you in the midst of so much idolatry. It's the same principle they wanted meat in the wilderness. You want meat? Here, have all this quail. You want meat? You're going to get so sick of quail be coming out your nostrils, man. You don't want what I've got for you? You want that? Then here, take it. Idolatry? Really? That's what you want? Well, then go to Babylon and live for 70 years in the midst of the most idolatrous country at that time. You're going to be so sick and tired of idols. And it happened. When they came back, Israel to this day is not struggling with idolatry. They struggle with atheism, but not idolatry. In fact, in Jerusalem, when we're on a bus, there's certain parts of Jerusalem where the Orthodox Jews are. They have posters on the lampposts, remember. Do not take a picture. You will bring certain and a timely death upon yourself if you take a picture of us. Because they believe that picture is an image, a graven image, a form of idolatry. Don't be bringing your cameras in. So we'll tell our folks if we go through that part. This last trip, we didn't go through that part because we didn't. But the first time we did. So don't take pictures. Don't take pictures. And don't take pictures, man. They don't like it. But it's amazing. They got fixed from idolatry. So it starts off in verse 18 about this idolatry. But then verse 19, here it comes. Woe to him, that fifth stanza. Woe to him who says to wood, wake up. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. I'm going to make my God out of wood. Now wake up. To the silent stone. Here's a stone. I think I'll worship that. Arise. It's going to teach me something. I'm sure it will. Look, it's overlaid with gold and silver. He says, but yet in this wood, in this stone, in this overlaid gold and silver idol, there's no breath at all. It reminds us, does it not, of Elijah on Mount Carmel? When the prophets of Baal and Elijah have a contest to see which God the nation of Israel is going to follow, remember? And Elijah, he challenges the children of Israel. He says, you're following Baal? Choose this day who you're going to serve. If it's going to be Baal, well, then serve Baal. If you're going to serve God, well, then serve God. Connie's dad used to say, you can't get anywhere straddling the fence. And that's what they were doing. They had one foot with Baal, one foot with God. And Elijah says, no. You make up your mind right now. Are you going to follow Baal? Are you going to follow God? What it's going to be? And they all just looked at him. So they have this contest. Remember the prophets of Baal? They have a bull. They put it down there and they say, okay, let's just each of us take turns. You guys go first. Put that bull on there. And ask Baal to come down and light a fire on that bull, accept it as an offering. So they do it, and they start dancing around that bull, the prophets of Baal. And they're dancing, and and Elijah gets in his flesh. It always makes me feel good when I read that, because I see even Elijah gets in his flesh sometimes. He got in his flesh. He starts taunting them. Maybe your God's sleeping. Maybe you should wake him up a little bit. Yeah, a little bit more. And they're like, oh. So they do it. They take their knives and they start cutting themselves. Which is, cutting is always a sign of the enemy. You don't bleed for God. God bled for us. But they do that. They're false worshipers. They cut themselves. They're cutting themselves. Oh, come on, Baal. We're cutting ourselves for you. God doesn't ask you to cut yourself. You have to bleed for God. He bled for us. But they're cutting themselves, and they're dancing, and they're screaming, and they're crying, and Elijah's on the sidelines, mocking away, taunting away. He's just being Elijah for a minute there in the flesh. Doesn't happen. Nothing happens. Remember, it's a drought for 3.5 years. We're in drought. We understand drought. Those of you that went to Israel, you remember Mount Carmel's up here. The Brook Kishon's way down there. it's drought. He says, guys, go down there, get some water. Dig a trench around my bull, on my altar. Pour water all around it. Up and down they go, up and down they go. Pouring water, pouring water. And drought, pouring water, pouring water, pouring water. Then remember, he says, now douse my bull. Just put water all over that bull. You think that was not a sincere, fervent prayer that Elijah's going to offer up right now? But he does. He says, God, basically, paraphrase, God, I'm trusting you on this. My bull's really wet. It's in the middle of a lake. God, show yourself. Fire comes down, laps up all the water, laps up the bull. Remember what the children of Israel did? The Lord, He's God. The Lord, He's God. We believe in God right now. We got God. They made their decision. It's amazing. One man stands for God, an entire nation follows that man's faith. Look at our nation today. We say, man, our nation's going to hell in a handbasket. It just takes one man to stand for God, for real. To take God at His word, to step out in faith and say, God, I'm going to trust you. God, you can do this. Let's go. That's all it takes. One man to truly sell out to God. Elijah did it. Well, he says here, back in Habakkuk in verse 19, woe to him who says to the wood, awake, the silent stone arise, it'll teach, behold, over gold and silver, yet there's no breath at all. Hello? That's pretty stupid. But then notice it says, but. If we look at the other woe to him, the first woe to him, notice in verse 6, woe to him. Notice the middle of verse 8, woe to him, why? Because, in verse 8. Verse 9, woe to him. And then we have a 4. Then we see another woe to him in verse 12, and in verse 14, a 4. Verse 11 was the 4 from verse 8, or verse 9. Verse 12, woe to him. At the end of that stanza, for the earth will be filled. Verse 15, woe to him. Verse 17, for the violence. Woe for, woe for, woe for, woe for. The last stanza, woe to him, no for. Woe to him, but notice verse 20, but. Woe to him who trusts in dead idols, but the Lord is in His holy temple. The folly of idolatry, but God is on the throne, His sovereignty. And that's the message of Habakkuk chapter 2. God, don't you see we're going down? God says, I've got this. I'm going to use a nation worse than my own people are acting, and they're going to come and discipline my people. And Habakkuk says, well, you're the God from eternity. We're going to trust you, God. And then God says, woe, 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 woe. But notice verse 20, but the Lord is in His holy temple. God is sovereign. He's on the throne. Those gods, the false gods, are silent. Our God's not silent. Says, let all the earth keep silence. We don't talk for our God talks for us. We don't create our God creates us. It's not the word of Kon, it's the word of God. It's not the word of a cult, it's not the word of a dead idol or a non-existent idol. Idols are nothing. There are demonic presences around these nothings, but it's nothing. The idol is nothing. Our God is alive. Our God is sovereign. Verse 20, but the Lord in His holy temple, let all the earth keep silent before Him. You see, God will, another I word, intervene. In His time, God is in control. So here we are in the United States of America, 2017. We've got so much goofy stuff going on over the last 50 years in our politics. It's just ridiculous, you know. And it seems like everything just continues to be weird. It's just weird. We just got weird stuff going on all the time. And we freak out. We look at our nation. We go, well, we took prayer out of schools. We started to legalize Molech worship. We started to just completely walk away from God, and we wonder why our society is messed up. What are we going to do? This I do know. God is in control. God will intervene. It's not going to be a party. It's not going to be a prosecutor. It's not going to be an act of Congress. that's going to make a difference in this country. God will intervene. The question is, where are we going to be when that intervention takes place? With the nation of Judah, God raised up a nation that was even worse than the people of Judah and the unrighteous people of Judah to discipline. I'm not saying God's going to do that, but that is what he's oftentimes done. But the bottom line is, what's your relationship with God? Where are you going to be when God intervenes? Are you going to be walking with God? Are you going to try and do whatever it is we try to do? God will intervene. So Habakkuk, chapter 1, God, why don't you do something? God says, oh, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something. Chapter 3, next week, we're going to look at the prayer of Habakkuk. And we're going to see his song of faith. So we go from this taunting song against the wicked to a song of faith. We said, remember, we started our study last week, Habakkuk starts with a sob. It ends with a song. In between there, we see Habakkuk talking to God and waiting on God. There's the key. We don't understand why this is happening. We don't understand on a personal level, God, why is this happening to me? We're going to talk to the Lord. We're going to wait on the Lord. We're going to get alone with the Lord, expecting him to speak. I've never had anybody ever tell me, I wish I wouldn't have spent so much time with the Lord this week. But I'm going to tell you, I've had a boatload of people either in walking out of divorce court, going to prison to visit their children, or sitting on a deathbed saying, I wish I'd have spent more time with the Lord. I wish I'd invested in my children. I wish I'd invested in my marriage. The things of God. So, talk with the Lord, wait on the Lord, and watch the sob actually be turned into a song. Next week we finish up Habakkuk. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time in your word. Lord, as a way of reminder, we do remember, Lord, to pull aside with you the Jeremiah 29 passage, Lord, that when we have that determination to hear from you, to get alone with you, you will meet and you will speak to those who diligently seek you. Determination. Isolation, Lord, to have a quiet time, a quiet place, a quiet heart to hear from you. An expectation. Expecting to hear from you, Lord. In faith. God, speak. Your servant listens. God, I pray this week we'd have some sweet, quiet times with you. Lord, that we'd hear from you. We'd understand that you're in control, that you are sovereign. On a national level, on a church level, on a personal level. God, you've got this. God, forgive us for trying to help you out, telling you what to do. God, help us just to be silent before you. In Jesus' name, amen.